Hello everyone, my name is Aakanksh Gurnani, and welcome to my YouTube channel Neuro Chat with AG. On this channel, I plan to cover topics that are closest to my heart and support the neurodiverse community. Topics related to neurodiversity, autism spectrum disorder, and more. On the channel, I will interview thought leaders, esteemed researchers, scientists, professors, doctors, and psychologists, seeking their views and updates on their latest work, research, etc. I will also chat with parents of neurodiverse kids and adults and talk about experiences of neurodiverse individuals. Mr. VR Ferose is a visionary leader and a prominent advocate for diversity and inclusion, particularly in the field of autism. As a senior executive at SAP, he has been instrumental in driving initiatives that promote neurodiversity in the workplace, including starting the industry's leading autism initiative, Autism at Work, in 2013, which became a Harvard case study. He is a regular speaker and gives guest lectures at Columbia University on the topic of personal leadership. He is the founder and chairman of the India Inclusion Foundation, which strives to spread awareness about the need to build a more equitable and inclusive society. Mr. Feroz is the co-author of the #1 Amazon bestseller, The Invisible Majority. The book has a foreword by His Holiness the Dalai Lama. He has also co-authored the bestseller Gifted, inspiring stories of people with disability, innovating the world, the globalization advantage, and the graphic novels Grit, the Major Story, and Grit, the Vishwas Story. His recent book, Shelf Aware, shares his exciting journey of discovering himself through the magical world of books. He also writes the bi-weekly column Flyleaf for New Indian Express.
Thank you, Akan. Such a joy to be in this conversation with you.
And to jump right into it, could you share your journey and how your personal experiences influenced your commitment to autism advocacy?
Yeah. So, it goes back to the time of 15 years ago, when my son was born. At that time, I was based in Gurgaon in India. And a few years later, when he was, I think, 15 months old, we moved to Bangalore, where I was the managing director for SAP Labs. And it was that time when we he was diagnosed with autism. I was completely unaware of what autism was. I didn't know. I literally had to search. The first time I looked it up, it was in Google, like, what is autism? So I really had no understanding of neither autism or in broadly even the world of disabilities. But I think after his diagnosis, obviously our lives changed as parents, as somebody who had to deal with such a big change in our lives. We went through our own you know what they call as the 4 stages of grief, because this we realized was a condition for life. Of course, we didn't know how severe it was when he was diagnosed, but over the years we realized that the best thing we could do is to provide him with the best possible therapies so he could grow into a fully independent child. It's been a long journey since then. He's 15 years old right now. He is non-verbal, so he doesn't. He has words, but he doesn't speak because he communicates using something called a letterboard. So he points at alphabet letters, and that's how he communicates with us. Right now, he is in 10th grade. He's been mostly homeschooled the last couple of years, but he's cognitively incredibly sharp. So I would say from the time he was 18 months old to now has been an incredible journey of, I would say, sometimes opposites. There is a lot of joy, but there's also a lot of suffering because it's a hard life for him and for us as well as parents. But we've embraced him. He is kind of the sun around which our lives revolve. He is what I've learned is he's just like any other child. He has his own dreams and he wants to do things like every other teenager does. So he's no different, except that he is probably thinks very differently. He sees the world differently. but but he also has a place in the world. And so it's been, as I said, an incredibly fulfilling journey, even though it's very hard. I think it's been a life of great meaning to raise him as a child.
And when you found out about Vivon's diagnosis, I'm sure like after learning what autism was, you realized that you'd have to change your parenting and lifestyle approach to ensure like best for his upbringing. So what
Yeah.
changes did you incorporate?
Yeah, and for us, Vivan was the first child and our only child. So obviously, we didn't know much about parenting. So for us, we think the way we brought up Vivan is the only way you can bring up a child because we don't know otherwise. I think some of the adjustments that a lot of people had to make were the people around us, for example, my parents and my in laws. They obviously were not aware of what autism was, just like us, but they had brought up children who were so-called, normal or like other kids. So in fact, sometimes they had to make a bigger adjustments more than us because for us, Vivan was the only child, and so. But I think the biggest challenge, or rather, the biggest learning for us was not is was to assume competency in him and assume that he's like any other child, even though sometimes the society thinks otherwise. Very simple things like, for example, we would not be invited to birthday parties because, especially when he was like say 5 or 6 years old, because people found him to be very odd, that he was stimming all the time. Sometimes he'll make noises. He would kind of go into a corner, and was non-social to a large extent. So a lot of people found him to be different, and they stopped inviting us for the kids' birthday parties. And that was the first time I saw exclusion, even though we were very educated people who understood, and we were, we assumed that people were sensitive and a lot more inclusive. But if you ask me, that's the first time I understood what true exclusion was, because he was not like everybody else. This, stopped inviting him to their homes. That was the first understanding of what exclusion was. So yes, in many ways, we have basically, learned on the job, learned as parents. Every day we said, okay, what is it that we need to do to ensure that we take care of him, but more importantly, maximize his potential. So we never underestimated him, even though sometimes the schools did. Schools would say, oh, he's probably in, like a kid on second grade, even though he was on 10th grade. So sometimes it was the lack of awareness and understanding that people projected on him, even though I think we knew that was incredibly smart, and he had a fully functional brain, and it's just that he couldn't communicate. So our goal always has been, how do we unlock his brain, and unlock what is inside him, so that the world can see him as a fully functional person, even though he has a lot of challenges. So I would say we've kind of, when it comes to parenting, we've kind of learned every day. Even today, we are learning something new about him, and I don't think that would ever stop. The only advantage was we were fortunate to have all the resources that we needed, in terms of our connections and network, and the ability in terms of pure just financial means sometimes to take care of all his needs, which, as you know, can be extremely expensive. Um, but we were very blessed and fortunate that we had the means to take care of him, and probably get the best out of him. So it's been a journey, and it continues to be a journey. So, and by the way, we are learning every day. I mean, I don't consider myself an expert because, what I thought was right 5 years ago, I've realized maybe not so right now. So, because we have also grown in the process, and I also feel there is a much more deeper understanding of autism right now. If I compare, say, 12 years ago, 12 or 13 years ago, when I first understood what autism was to what it is now, there has been a massive change in a deeper understanding and people's mindset on the topic. So yes, so to give you a short question, we are, we're still learning.
What kind of early intervention programs did you try out with Vivon, and what do you suggest for other parents and caregivers?
Yeah, I think what I learned in the autism world is that, and I'm sure you would have heard this many times, is every autistic child is very different. And so there is no one fit for all when it comes to raising a child on the spectrum. I think there are some basics that everybody does, which is like you will do an ABA, you would do speech, you would do OT. I think that's the baseline. Every child who's diagnosed with autism does that. But the other thing that we've realized is that every child on the spectrum also comes with secondary issues. In Vivan's case, he has a severe form of Crohn's disease, which is an autoimmune disease of the small intestine. And so, it becomes a little bit more complicated because they have multiple challenges. But I would say, if you ask me, we've tried almost every possible therapy that exists, and there are many that exist when it comes to autism, and we've tried almost all of them. The only thing that I would suggest to parents who have children on the spectrum is to try everything, but to move on if it's not working. So we tried a lot. Our biggest challenge was his lack of speech, and so we tried various things, but finally we landed with rapid prompt method, and that is the one method which unlocked him. And this happened when he was 9 years old. That until he was 9 years old, none of us, neither me nor my wife, knew that he was cognitively sharp, because the school said he's thinking like a 2 year old kid. But at the age of 9, because we assumed that just because he's not speaking, he's not listening and thinking, and that was completely wrong. He was listening to everything that was happening. He had his own mind. He was extremely sharp. We, it's just that we didn't know how good he was. But as soon as we gave him a letter pad and allowed him to communicate by spelling out words, which is by pointing to the letterboard, we suddenly realized he's a pretty sharp thinking person. And it in fact broke our hearts to realize that we underestimated him until he was 9 years old. And so one of the first things I tell people, especially parents who have children on the spectrum, is to assume competency. A lot of us assume that they're not competent, but I would say assume age level competency. So if they're 9 years old, assume they are like any other 9 year old, even if they're not able to communicate. So that has been one of the biggest learnings for us, is to assume competency on your child and find ways to maximize the potential.
And one thing I wanted to ask, kind of before we got into more detailed questions, are there any misconceptions about autism that you'd like to address?
Well, there are many. I think the biggest misconception about autism is to assume that kids on the spectrum or adults on the spectrum do not like to socialize or do not like to meet other people. I think this is one of the biggest misconceptions. And I'll tell you why. The reason they don't like to, communicate with people or be in a social setting is because of the sensory overload. It is not that they don't like people. It is just that when they have too many sensory overloads, they're not able to process so many things. But they are like any other kids. They like to have friends and they like to, talk to people. And to assume that they are non-social and they don't like people is not true at all. I think they love people. They love to have friends. In fact, one of the challenges is many of them grow up without having friends. Especially, I'm now talking specifically about the non-verbal category. If you look at autism, probably there are one third of the people who are autists on the spectrum have low ability, low speech, or are non-verbal. And we just assume that they don't want to have friends, but that's not true at all. So that's the number one, I would say, misconception that exists about kids on the spectrum. The second misconception is the fact that they are not. I think this could go depending on where they stand on the spectrum, how severe they are. But I would just say assume full competency. It's a best place to start, to assume that they're fully competent and they're cognitively sharp, and to provide them, especially when it comes to education, grade level education. A lot of times I have seen that if they are, in say fifth grade, they are teaching them first grade stuff, and you're dumbing them down instead of assuming that they can manage, instead of giving them same grade level inputs. I would say those are the two big insights that I have had when it comes to people on the spectrum. And the other thing, they'll want to have the same. Again, one of the things is like they don't. Of course, they don't understand sometimes sarcasm. They don't understand because they think very differently. But they want to have their share of fun and joy. I've seen that Vivan has an incredible sense of humor, but his sense of humor is his sense of humor, very different. But to think that they don't have a sense of humor is not true at all. It's a very different sense of humor because they see the world very differently. So those are some of probably misconceptions that I see about autism.
And your book, The Invisible Majority, discusses almost a billion people with disabilities and their challenges in day-to-day life.
Yeah.
Which key challenges need to be addressed on priority?
So if you look at the book, I wrote this as a blueprint to making India inclusive, but it's actually applicable for any place in the world. I just look India because that's the place I know the most. And I found that, there was no holistic approach to looking at disability. In When I say holistic, I'm talking about from the time you're born to the time you die. A person with disability goes through various stages. In many ways, I call it like a cradle to grave approach, right? Don't look at disability as like, okay, what happens and how do we provide them jobs, or how do we provide them education? But I said, let's look at it end to end. Now, when I look at it, I think every I call it the seven pillars of the inclusion continuum, and I think all of them are important. But the most important, and I think that's the lowest common denominator, is awareness. Because I found that especially in places like India, disability is still seen as a taboo. People don't speak about it. You won't find disabled people out in the open, and it's also because of lack of accessibility, and that, as I said, people see it as sometimes as bad karma, and a lot of different social reasons. And unless we change that mindset that people with disabilities are like any of us, and there's a high chance that we will eventually become disabled, and if nothing else because of old age. So there is, this is one category of people that we will all become part of. So it's not the othering that's going to help us. You should not assume that disability happens to somebody else. It will happen to all of us, whether you like it or not. If, as I said, if nothing else, because of old age. So my biggest mission has been to change the narrative around disability. Is been to change the mindsets of people that disability is just another way of being on the human spectrum. They're just the same. Maybe they see the world a little differently. So I would say the number one priority is to change people's mindsets, and that can only happen by spreading awareness. Once you change people, once people become aware, I think they become more sensitive. Once they become more sensitive, I think they embrace people like everybody else. I mean, you are a great example of somebody who probably didn't understand about autism and neurodiversity unless you started volunteering. But once you understood, you became a much more sensitive person. And because of that, you became a lot more compassionate. And because of compassion, you're doing this beautiful podcast, right? But it all started with awareness. If you just look back, you started with awareness. Otherwise, you would have seen an autistic person and you would have thought, oh, this is somebody else. I don't have to deal with them. But now you've embraced them as one amongst you. So I think at the fundamental level, awareness is without doubt the most important priority.
And your books, Grit and Gifted, share many success stories of overcoming challenges and reaching potential. Like Grit, the Vishwas story, which talks about Vishwas, who lost his hands at a young age and then
Yeah.
proceeded to do so much more than
Yeah.
the expectations people thought he was limited to after that tragic incident.
Yeah. Yeah.
So would you like to share one of those stories with us?
Yeah, I mean, as I said, my first book, Gifted, has 15 stories of people with disabilities. And then I started writing the graphic novels, Grit, as a series because I realized that I wanted I wanted books to be more accessible. I wanted kids to read because, across the world, less and less people are reading books. They're consuming a lot of content, but really not reading books in the long form. And that's how I started writing the graphic novels. I mean, it's very hard to pick up a favorite, Akansh, because there's so many. But because you mentioned about Vishwas, I would say Vishwas is a fascinating story because he truly demonstrates what grit is all about. Losing both your hands in a completely freak accident. And as a child, and what was even more sad was his father was trying to save him when he fell off the building. His father died while trying to save him. So he grew up with a lot of guilt, thinking that not only has he lost his hand, he lost his father because he was trying to save him. Imagine to have such a defining moment in your life. Most people would end up, not coming out of it. I mean, he went through his stages of depression and all of that, but he is a fully independent person. When I went to his home, he would make tea for me, and with his legs, he was a fully functional person. He could do everything that you and me could do. Unless you saw him in action, you wouldn't believe that how much he has trained himself to be fully independent. He got married, has a beautiful daughter. He's living life like everybody else. But more importantly, he's a swimmer. So he's a para swimmer. He's won numerous awards, medals for the country. He's an outstanding dancer. He's been on television for his dancing skills. He is, karate black belt, so he's into martial arts, and he's a movie star. He worked in his own biography as a movie star, and I'm like, these are most people can't do even one of them in their whole life, right? I mean, how is this guy who's gone through so much pain able to do so many different things? But more importantly, when you meet him, you'll realize he's an incredibly nice, humble guy. And that trumps it all. It's not the achievements, but the fact that all the suffering and the difficulties hasn't even got an iota of bitterness in him. He didn't never ask, why me? He never asked, why has life been so unfair to me and how can I get through this? He's one of the nicest persons I have met. I have great admiration for people like him. And that's why I wanted to tell his story to the world.
It's very powerful, that book. SAP was a pioneer in the program Autism at Work, which became a Harvard case study.
Yeah.
Since you were involved in this initiative from its inception, please tell us more about that journey and how it all came about.
Yeah, I think when I look back, I often say that it was a lot of serendipity. It was a lot of good people doing the good things with good intentions. And I often say that we are all actors in a series of coincidences. You can only make the connections looking backwards, right? So, I just want to put it out there because sometimes I get more credit than I deserve. Yes, I started the program. As I said, after Vivan's diagnosis, while I was speaking to a lot of parents, they said one of the biggest challenges is people on the spectrum are completely, dependent on the parents for everything, not just day-to-day activities, but even financial means, because most of the people basically do not get a job. So that was a big trigger for me to understand how do we provide employment for people with disabilities. And then I happened to meet this amazing social entrepreneur, and his name is Thorkel Sonna, who built a company called Specialist Stern, which means the specialist in Denmark. He again was a father of a autistic child, and he very quickly realized, his son, while he's sharp and very good, may not be able to get a job because of the biases that we have. People assume that kids on the spectrum or adults on the spectrum are non-social, they cannot work in teams, they're not communicative, and those are the only skills that matter if you have to clear an interview. So he said, let me start a company where I will only hire people on the spectrum. So his company, the specialist, 80% of the people were on the spectrum, the remaining 20% were basically project managers who were managing the project, but the work was actually done by people on the spectrum. So I was so inspired by what he was doing. I invited him to SAP to give a talk, and then me and at that time my executive assistant, both of us traveled to Denmark, and we said, let's see what he's doing. So we actually spent a day in his office, and I was so inspired by what I saw. I came back to SAP and I told my HR, let's hire people on the spectrum, and they literally fell off the chairs, and they're like, Firoz, are you smoking? What are you saying? You have no clue what you're telling. How can we hire? Because most of the people on the spectrum were not even graduates. Forget graduation; they're not even gone beyond 10th grade. And SAP, you need an engineering degree. I said, you know what? Let's try. Let's try them by hiring them as contract employees. So we will test it out and we'll see if it works. Of course, I got a lot of pushback, but I was fortunate that I pushed it through because I was convinced. I'd seen it work, and I said, if it can work in Denmark, why shouldn't it work in India? So we will try it out. So we hired the first three people on the autism spectrum. This was way back in 2011 in the testing team, and SAP Labs had a big team of testers. So we basically had to teach them how to test a product, and we had good mentors and buddies with each of them so that they could help them get up to speed very quickly. And while they took some initial time to ramp up, once they knew how to do it, they were pretty good. They were as good as any other person. In many cases, some of them were super good, even better than the others. So I think we had initial evidence that hiring people on the autism spectrum makes a lot of business sense. I'm not just talking from it looks good and it makes us feel good. Those are all there, but I think I was very convinced that you have to prove that it makes business sense. And that was the start of that was the start of the program, and it wasn't even called Autism at Work. We just tried it. But after that, when I became a young global leader, I spoke about this at the India Economic Forum in New Delhi. That why hiring people who are on the autism spectrum makes business sense. They loved the speech, and so they invited me to speak about it again at the World Economic Forum in Davos. They said, "Firoz, this is such a novel idea. Why don't you speak at Davos?" And the rest, as they say, is history. I gave a speech there, which you can see on YouTube. It's just a 4.5 minute speech where I talk about the ability and disability. And that speech was picked up by CNN. They carried my speech verbatim the next day, and our CEOs read about it. And they called me and said, Firoz, are you doing this? And I'm like, yeah, I've been doing this for probably more than a year now, and I didn't tell anyone. And they're like, does it really work? And I'm like, yeah, it works. It's I've proven it. It works, and there is a business benefit. And then they asked the chief diversity and inclusion officer to actually go and check it out in Bangalore. Like, how does this really work? And so she came to Bangalore, spent a whole few days there, and she sent back a report to the CEOs. I think this is fantastic. Maybe we should scale this up across the company. Because if it works in India, it can work everywhere. India is the hardest place to make it work, considering that there's not enough talent there, education there, there's the social issues, no insurance, taboo, no teachers. I mean, all of this is a big challenge in India. And if it can work in India, why shouldn't it work anywhere else? And that's how the CEOs at that time, Jim Schnaber and Bill McDermott, they made this commitment. They asked if what percentage of people are on the spectrum, and I said 1%. And this was, as I said, way back in 2013. And they said, okay, we'll hire 1% of the global workforce at SAP on the spectrum. So we were 65,000 people then. So we made a commitment to hire 650 full-time employees by 2020. Unfortunately, I would say COVID happened, and so a lot of things kind of slowed down a little bit in the last few years. But we have already hired more than 220 full-time employees, more than 200 part-time employees. But I think the biggest success is that the program went beyond SAP. Today, I think more than 100 companies, I don't have the exact numbers, but last count, more than 100 companies have embraced some form of autism at work program. In fact, New York Times carried a huge article about the autism at work program at Microsoft, who basically, took what we had done, and our whole idea was to spread it in the corporate world. We started the at Work Summit, and kind of shared all the best practices that we had learned. So it's been a huge success. It's in I would say it went viral pretty much. But if you ask me how did it happen, as I said, good people with good intentions can sometimes create magic.
And could you share a few success stories from this program?
Oh, there are many. In fact, I would say the one that probably caught the imagination of the people, at least both within SAP and outside, is every year we have something called the Hasso Plattner Award, which is a founders award for innovation. This is only given to one team every year, and this is extremely competitive. Every team applies for it. They want this is like the Oscars within SAP every year, and the ones who win eventually get to get a lot of money, investment, stock options, but more importantly, a great recognition from our CEO and the board members. And in 2019, for the first time, SAP made an exception and didn't give the award to a team but to an individual. And this individual was hired as part of the Autism at Work program, and he was based out of Argentina. And I was so proud to see that, and I got a lot of mails saying, Feroz, now we see what the what you had started. The Autism at Work program has now got legs, has now got proven that it works beyond doubt. And so, if there was no Autism at Work program, this person wouldn't be at SAP. His name is Nicholas Neumann. If you do a YouTube search on Nicholas Neumann and Hasso Plattner Award, you will find this video. It was really one of my proudest moments, because, in many ways, it was a validation of what I had started way back in 2011. It took 8 years to get to that point, but at least by then I didn't have to convince anybody. I was like, okay, now it works. Otherwise, I always had to kind of give a pitch and like say why it works. Now I'm like, okay, I'm done with that. Now I can move on to the next big thing. But at least I don't have to prove people anymore. But yeah, I mean, there's still a lot of work to be done. I mean, there is always. I still believe we're kind of scratching the surface, but at least we made significant progress.
Like you just said, the Autism at Work program at SAP worked. So, do you have any tips for achieving and maintaining continued success similar to what you were able to achieve for other companies or initiatives who are looking to do something similar?
I think there are a lot of insights we've got through the program. Maybe I'll just call out two or three of them. The first is to start small. A lot of people, and when I look back, the reason we got it right is we experimented with 3 people. We didn't say we'll hire 100 people. I would say always start small, because you have to learn, and there is no one fit all for everyone. So every organization has to have their own learnings. They have to do the sensitization workshop. They have to have acceptance amongst the people. So start small is the first thing, and then you learn, and then you scale over a period of time. The second, I would say, is that again, the reason it worked at SAP is because there was a leadership buy-in. While and so top down makes to have leaders who are convinced about it is very important, and the leaders have to walk the talk. When I was doing the Autism at Work program, I said the first person who's going to hire is me. So in my office, I had a person who was who was on the spectrum. So I said, I have to walk the talk. I can't tell you should do it without me doing it myself. So I think leadership plays a huge important role. When leaders do it, the others follow as well. So that's, I think, significantly important. The third is that every company has to be open to make reasonable accommodations for them. Just to give you an example, one of the developers in my team, he couldn't work in an open setting because it was too bright for him, and he got very overwhelmed with noises around him. So we had to give him a separate cubicle. Cubicles were always given to the VPs and SVPs. And when they told me if it was, he's not able to function, I said, use my room. I don't need a cubicle. So I gave away my cubicle and I said, use this. So he was, even though a developer, he was sitting in my office. We closed down all, we kind of made it a lot more darker, gave him a noise canceling device so that he can work at his full potential. But that's an accommodation that I had to make, or we had to make. And that is what I say, that every person is unique. And so you have to be willing to make some reasonable accommodations based on their needs.
And in the last 10 years, many companies have rethought and re-engineered their human resource management policies and processes to make them more inclusive and effective. So do you think any refinement is necessary going forward? And by that, I mean, like, how you were mentioning, like, with autism at work, while you guys have done a lot, you still see areas where there could be more improvement done. So
Yeah. Oh yeah, this is going to be work in progress forever, because we're kind of understanding it a lot more right now. I would say I see a few things that would fundamentally is required, and I think it will happen. The first is companies also need to cater to the caregivers. So it's not just about having people who are on the autism spectrum that needs attention. A lot of people are caregivers. I'm not autistic, but I'm a full-time a caregiver for Vivan. So I think companies have to build policies to ensure that there is enough for caregivers, because caregiving is sometimes an overwhelming experience, because you're 100, it's a 24/7 job. So I think the ability to give a lot more flexibility and accommodation to caregivers is important. And I'm not just saying caregivers just if you have an autistic child. I'm saying you could be a caregiver to an older parent, right? And that requires time and attention. So I think there will be a lot of policies that will be included in the future for caregiving. The second is the therapies are just incredibly expensive. If you just look at a speech therapy or a occupational therapy for 40 minutes, it's cost sometimes $160. Um, Now, how many people can afford that? So I think the coverage of insurance is going to include many of these things, and so so I would say a lot of good companies will have a lot of friendly and better insurance coverages and better support for people who have people who have children who are disabled. I would say that's a significant step that would happen. Otherwise, you're financially drained taking care of a child. Remember, this is for life. This is not like it ends after a year or two. This is a condition for life. So I think that you will see a significant change there. The third is really, I'm hoping that a lot of innovation will make it better, because I think only technology can scale. Today, there's a supply demand problem, which means the demand for therapists is way more than the number of therapists. And that's where maybe technology can even that out, that technology can help you scale. So I think these are, and so I'm hoping that companies and people within companies can also do a lot more on innovation to support neurodiverse people. So I think these are two or three things that I see will happen in the future, and it's happening already on the ground. A lot of these things are already being worked on.
beyond autism at the workplace, what other areas and policy changes need to be focused on to improve the lives of individuals with autism?
I would say, in my book, The Invisible Majority, I've written down, at least 10 different steps, what governments could do. I'm talking purely from a policy point. Even though it's a very India specific thing, I think a lot of it could be done beyond India as well. One of the things which is super interesting is to have specific, is to study disability and make it part of a university. Today you have studies for every topic that you will have studies for AI, you will have you'll have studies for sports, you will have institutes that have a department for all of these various topics. Where is the Department of Disabilities? I think there's probably a few handful of universities that deeply engage and understand and study disabilities, even though 15% of the world's population is disabled. If a billion people are affected by something and we don't have it as an integral part of our education system, then we have a problem. So I think it should become embedded into every educational system, because the more people study, the more people will understand. It goes back to my original premise that if you spread awareness, it will raise the overall levels. In fact, when I looked at India, there wasn't a single book that had looked at disability end to end. People were talking about bits and pieces. US has a little bit more literature, but India didn't have. That's why I wrote about that. So I think, um, you know, uh, from a policy point, the American disabilities law is incredibly progressive, and so is India's one. So there are a lot of good points in the policy. At least the India ones are very badly implemented, or there is no implementation. The laws are very good, but the implementation is a big failure, at least in India. So I think those are some of the areas that we need to do a lot more improvement.
And you are the founder and chairman of the India Inclusion Foundation. So, what
Yeah.
is the organization's charter and vision?
So, as I said, the number one problem that I found in India was lack of awareness. And so we said, what does it take to make India a truly inclusive country? Which means, what does it take for 1.3 billion people to understand the basics of disability? And when I say the basics of disability, I mean just three questions. How do you define disability? What are the different kinds of disability as per the rights of people for disability in India, which was passed in 2016? There are 621 different kinds of disabilities. I mean, the US laws are very different. I'm now speaking specifically about India. But that said, they don't know about Down syndrome and autism and SMA and so many different kinds of disabilities. So the second question is, how do we educate people that there are 21 different disabilities? And the third question is, do people know their rights? In India, as I said, we have a very progressive disability law. It's probably one of the most progressive laws in the world. For example, if if you are call out a disabled person in a negative way, you can it's actually considered a criminal offense. So it's a very progressive law, but people just don't know about the law. So our goal of the foundation is to ensure that 1.3 billion people understand this basic question. What is the definition of disability? What are the 21 disabilities? And do people know their rights? And we want to do this by the year 2030, which is aligned with the UN strategic SDGs. So that's the mission. And we use every platform we can, from conducting an annual conference to artists, through movies, every possible medium we try to use to spread awareness.
And you're also a big part of the India Inclusion Summit. So,
Yeah.
how do you leverage that platform to promote awareness and change perceptions about autism?
Yeah, so the India Inclusion Summit is broadly focused on disability. So it's not just about autism. Of course, autism is included as much. But that is how I started my foundation. In fact, even before I registered my foundation, I started the India Inclusion Summit. And at that point, again, I realized that disability was not in the mainstream narrative. Maximum, you'll have one small panel discussion on disabilities. But I said, why not build an entire conference just focus on disability? Again, looking back at the year when we started in 2012, it was a very progressive idea, because people said, why would people show up for 2 days to discuss disability? I mean, I can understand if you have a 30-minute panel, part of a larger conference, but that's what we wanted to do. We wanted to have to bring disability discussion to the mainstream and spread awareness, but in a way that is celebratory. We said we are not going to sympathize with people with disability. That's not the goal. The idea is to celebrate the people with disabilities for who they are, and really use the platform to connect and catalyze and spread more awareness about disability. So that was the mission. We've done it now for, this is the 12th edition of the summit. We've done it every year except the year when COVID was happening, and we've done one virtual event as well during COVID times, but we've done it without fail for 12 years. It's a completely free event. It is probably one of the best events focused on disability in the world. Around 800 to 1,000 people show up every year. And it is entirely run by volunteers. So we don't have a single employee in our foundation. We don't have an office space. We say, we have zero assets at the foundation. The only asset is people and their goodwill. That's the only thing that works.
And how can one get involved with the India Inclusion Summit?
Yeah, I mean, we have right now, as I said, it's based on volunteerism. So people can just write to our contact and say, I want to contribute. But we also tell people that volunteering means that you have to first know what are the skills you bring to the table, right? I mean, so I often say skills are more important than the interests. For example, right now we run something called the Everyone is Good at Something campaign, which is going on for the last 4+ years. Everybody can check that out. Everyone is good at something.com. Now we have 25 volunteers who are working on it. One of our biggest needs is writers. We need people who can write, because we basically tell stories every week about people with disabilities across India. But when you interview them, they speak different languages. If you go to Bengal and interview somebody in a village, they speak Bengali. So now we need to have somebody who speaks Bengali, who can speak to this person and interview him in Bengali, then translate it into English, right? So we need very different kinds of volunteers for different kinds of activities. Right now, what I'm looking for is a lot of good writers who can volunteer their time. Like they can say, I'll do one interview in a month and I'll write a 500-word story. And then our editor obviously edits that. So there are various ways to get engaged, but it has to be a good match. The skills you bring should be the ones that we are looking for. A lot of people come with a lot of enthusiasm, say, I want to volunteer, but sometimes they just don't have the skills that we are looking for. But the easiest way is to send us an email and we'll be happy. It's all on the website, and it's called indiainclusionsummit.com, and then we'll come back on how you can support us.
Thank you for that. And what are the key differences you have observed in the acceptance and support for autism in various parts of the world?
Yeah, I think when I have to again look, I've been fortunate to have met and traveled around the world. I would say US and UK are probably the most advanced and most progressive in terms of both understanding of autism as well as the depth of research that is happening in these two countries, as well as the access to new therapies and medications and so on. So I would say US and UK are by far the most progressive. In India, I would say we are at least 20 years behind. And again, I'm not just throwing a number out there, but I think even within India, there's a huge gap between urban and rural India. Most of the autism awareness or the therapies are just extremely city centric. So I would say Delhi and Bangalore are probably the best when it comes to access to therapies. So other than the major cities, whether it's Chennai or Hyderabad or other places, most of the other places have really no understanding of autism, and so a whole generation of children are growing up without having maximized their potential. So that I think is a huge challenge. Uh, so that's when it comes to just the basics of understanding of autism. The other is really the access to therapies. As I said, my son we are able to unlock his mind thanks to access to rapid prompt method. Now, RPM is only available in the US. I mean, imagine so many nonverbal children in India have no access to that kind of therapy and understanding. So my goal is to bring some of these new therapies and insights back to India, so that people get benefited there. So that's, I would say, one of the many challenges that I see is that it's pretty unevenly distributed. What is available here is not available in other parts of the world. Even within the US, I would say, some cities are there's the access to therapies is much higher than the others. So yeah, so that's where I see right now.
What are your future goals for the India Inclusion Foundation?
I think the future goal is to not exist, which means that if everybody is fully aware of what disabilities are, if everybody is fully aware of their rights, and if we become a much more aware and sensitive country, I can shut down my foundation. I don't need it anymore, right? Because that was the original goal. But I don't know if it'll ever happen in my lifetime. I mean, we've put 2030 as a very ambitious goal, and I hope technology can play a big role in spreading awareness. But I think it doesn't mean that just because everybody's aware, the work ends. As I said, there's so many things. The education system has to change. People have to find employment and jobs. When I look at profoundly disabled people, how do we take care of them when it comes to assisted living, for example, and so on and so forth. So I think it's a massive, massive problem to solve. I don't even know, as I said, if my next generation would be able to fully solve it. But right now, our mission is really focused on how much can we do by 2030, and we'll see what happens after that. But till 2030, we're doing everything we can to ensure that at least inclusion when it comes to disabilities is hopefully taken care of. As I said, inclusion is a very broad word, and I'm only focusing on the disability part of it. And I hope our goal is to really make India inclusive by 2030, and so we are working towards that.
And is there anything else you'd like to share with our audience?
No, I just want to say thank you, Akansh, and I'm very proud of what you're doing. I mean, I wish more children learned from you the value of uh, not just compassion but education. I think Aristotle told it very beautifully. He said, "The purpose of education is action, not education." Right? If you've learned something, and if you haven't done something about it, it has no meaning, right? I mean, just saying that, okay, I've read a book, so what? I mean, fine, it expands your thinking, but have you put it into action in your own small ways? And to see you doing this so beautifully, I get so much of joy, that young people like you are doing your own bit to change the narrative around the world. And that gives me hope. People often ask me in sometimes a very hopeless world, what gives me hope? For me, it's kids like you who give me hope that the next generation is a much more sensitive, compassionate set of younger generation, way more sensitive and compassionate than we were. And so that gives me hope that it's kids like you who will make the world a much better place. So thank you for doing what you do.
Well, thank you for saying that. But I think it's like a build off kind of thing. Like, if you and your generation hadn't, started learning about it, then I never would have started where I started. And, so
Yeah.
yeah. But Mr. Ferose, I want to extend my heartfelt thanks for taking the time to speak with me. Your insights about neurodiversity and your work at SAP and IIF are really, really inspiring. Your passion for creating an inclusive environment for those on the spectrum, with other disabilities and just in general, is motivating and enlightening. And you know what you've shared here, like the impact of your work is evident, and it was a privilege to learn more about your journey and the initiatives you're leading. Um, Thank you so much for your generosity and sharing your time and expertise. And I look forward to following your continued success and reading your new book, Shelf Aware. Thank
Thank
you.
you. Thank you, Akansh. All the best to you. And if I can be of any help, just let me know. Okay. And keep doing all the good work and wish you the best.